husband passed the bar exam on a Thursday in October. I know the exact date because I had requested the day off from the hospital 3 weeks in advance, had bought a bottle of champagne that cost more than I could really afford, and had driven 40 minutes in rush hour traffic to be standing in that lobby when he walked out. He passed. He hugged me. He said, "We did it." I remember thinking that was a strange way to put it, since I was the one who had spent the last 3 years working double shifts in the ICU while he studied, but I let it go. I was happy for him. I was proud of him. I thought we were finally going to exhale. He served me divorce papers 11 months later, the evening of his first major client dinner. I was not invited to the dinner. The papers came by courier while I was eating leftover soup at our kitchen table in my scrubs. There was a sticky note on the envelope in his handwriting. It said, "This is better for both of us. Please don't make it difficult." I sat there for a long time with the soup going cold and that envelope in my hands, and I kept reading that sticky note like the words were going to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. I want to be honest about who I was before all of this, because I think it matters. I was not naive in the way people sometimes picture when they hear a story like mine. I was a 34-year-old ICU nurse. I had seen people die. I had held the hands of strangers at the worst moments of their lives and stayed steady through all of it. I was not soft. I was not someone who missed things easily. But I missed things with my husband. Or maybe I saw them and decided they were something else. His name was, well, I'm going to call him what my mother called him. The one time I told her something was wrong, she called him that man. So that's what I'll use. That man, and I met when I was 29. I was finishing my second year on the floor. He was a paralegal with ambitions and a way of talking about the future that made it sound like a place you could actually get to if you just worked hard enough. He was charming in a specific way, the kind of charming that makes you feel chosen. Like out of every woman in the room, he had looked at you and decided you were the one worth impressing. I was flattered. I'm not ashamed of that. We dated for 14 months and then we got engaged and then we got married in a small ceremony in my aunt's backyard in Virginia with about 40 people and a cake my cousin made herself. It was a good day. I have photographs from that day where I looked genuinely happy, and I was. I need to say that. I was genuinely happy. The first time I noticed something was maybe 8 months in, when he came home talking about law school. He had been looking into it, he said. Evening programs, part-time options. He had a plan. He had always wanted to practice law, not just support it from the outside. I listened to all of it and I said, "Okay, so what do we need to do?" That was the question I always asked. What do we need to do? What we need to do, it turned out, was a lot. The program he wanted was not cheap. We had savings, mostly mine because I had been working full-time since I was 22, and he had spent his 20s moving between jobs, but it wasn't enough to cover tuition and living expenses both. So I picked up extra shifts. I started working 5, sometimes 6 days a week. I covered holidays. I took the overnight rotations nobody else wanted because they paid a differential. I told myself it was temporary. People do hard things for people they love. That's what love is. The hard things stretched from 1 year into 2 and then into 3. I paid tuition. I paid our rent on an apartment that I was barely ever home to enjoy. I bought him suits for his internship interviews because he said he needed to look the part. And I agreed because I understood that presentation mattered in law, and I wanted him to succeed. I kept the fridge stocked and the bills paid. And I tried, on the days when I wasn't completely exhausted, to be the kind of wife who asked about his day and listened to the answer. In the 3rd year, things got quiet in a way that I told myself was just stress. He was studying for the bar. I had heard the bar exam was brutal. I gave him space. I stopped asking why he was coming home late. I stopped questioning the weekends when he said he was at the library. I told myself that after the exam we would reconnect. We would use that champagne. We would finally breathe. He passed. He hugged me. He said, "We did it." And 11 months later, the courier came to our door. I don't know how to describe what happens in your body when you read something like that. It's not quite grief, and it's not quite rage. It's more like a sudden cold stillness, the way a room goes quiet when the power cuts out. Everything just stops for a second. And then you start to understand what you're looking at. The papers were thorough. He had clearly been planning this for a while. There were proposed divisions of assets that were heavily tilted in his favor. He wanted the apartment, which was in both our names but which I had been paying for almost entirely. He had a lawyer already. Of course he had a lawyer. He was a lawyer now. I didn't call him that night. I sat in the kitchen and I finished my soup and I read every page and then I folded the papers carefully and put them back in the envelope and I went to bed. The next morning I called my own lawyer. Her name was Marguerite, and she had been recommended to me by a colleague at the hospital who had gone through her own divorce 2 years before. Marguerite was a small woman in her early 60s with reading glasses she wore on a chain and a way of sitting very still while you talked that made you feel like every word was being catalogued. She listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she asked me 3 questions, looked at the numbers I had brought in a folder and said, "He made a mistake." She meant legally. The apartment lease had been in my name originally before we added his. My paycheck stub showed 3 years of documented income that had gone into our joint account, which he had then drawn from for tuition payments. I had kept every receipt. I don't know why I kept every receipt. I think I am just the kind of person who keeps things, but Marguerite looked at that folder and said it changed the picture considerably. We negotiated. It took 4 months and it was not pleasant. I will not say it didn't hurt because it did. There were days I drove home from Marguerite's office and sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside and do my job. There were nights I called my mother in Richmond and didn't say much, just let her talk, because her voice was the only thing that made the apartment feel less like a place where something had died. But I did not fall apart. I want to be clear about that. I was sad and I was angry, and I was sometimes humiliated in ways I couldn't fully explain, but I did not fall apart. The settlement was fair. Not generous, he made sure of that, but fair. I got enough to put a deposit on something of my own. I got my car. I got half the joint account, which was not a lot but was mine. I moved out on a Saturday in March with the help of 2 colleagues from the floor and my cousin who drove up from Virginia with his truck. We moved everything in about 4 hours. The apartment I was moving into was a 1-bedroom in a quieter part of town, 3rd floor of a building that had good light, and a landlord named Mr. Okafor, who had been managing that property for 20 years and ran it with the kind of quiet competence that made you trust him immediately. When I came to sign the lease, I was honest with him. I told him I had just come out of a divorce and I was starting over, and I needed the place to feel safe. He listened. And then he said he would waive the pet deposit if I ever decided I wanted a cat, because in his experience, people starting over did better with a living thing to come home to. I did not get a cat immediately, but I thought about it. The first few months in that apartment were strange in a way I hadn't expected. I had been so focused on surviving the divorce, on the logistics of it, the legal back and forth, the moving, that I hadn't thought much about what came after. After was just quiet. I came home from work and the quiet was there waiting for me. I ate dinner alone. I watched things on my laptop in bed. I called my mother more than I probably needed to, but something was also happening underneath all of that quiet. Something I didn't have language for at the time, but that I understand now. I was resting. Genuinely resting. Maybe for the first time in 3.5 years. I wasn't running from shift to shift with someone else's ambitions to fund. I wasn't performing okayness for a man who had stopped seeing me. I was just present. In my own life, in my own space. I started sleeping better. I started cooking again, real cooking, not just whatever I could throw together in 20 minutes between shifts. I signed up for a ceramics class on Saturday mornings because a flyer appeared in the break room at work and something about it appealed to me. I went to the first class expecting to feel awkward and left feeling like I had done something that was entirely uncomplicatedly mine. I went back the next Saturday and the one after that. There was a woman in the class named Felicity who was in her late 50s and had been doing ceramics for years, and who had a way of making everyone around her feel more competent than they actually were. She became something like a friend, the slow accumulating kind. We started getting coffee after class sometimes. She listened well, and she gave advice only when it was asked for, which I found remarkable and rare. I was not looking for anything when I met someone. I want to say that plainly, because I think it matters to the story. His name was Marcus. He was a high school history teacher who had a daughter in middle school and a calm, straightforward way of existing in the world that I found startling at first, because I had forgotten that some men were just like that, just steady, just present, not performing anything. We met at a fundraiser Felicity had dragged me to, which was for a literacy nonprofit she volunteered with. He was helping set up tables when I arrived. We talked for most of the evening about things I don't entirely remember. Teaching, healthcare, a documentary we had both seen recently, and at the end of the night he asked if I wanted to get dinner sometime. I said yes. I did not tell him much about my marriage for several months, not because I was hiding it, but because I was still figuring out what I thought about it, and I didn't want to bring something half-processed into something new and good. He was patient about this in a way that cost him nothing, it seemed, which I found remarkable. He had patience the way some people have a natural sense of direction. It was just there, reliable, not a performance. I told him eventually one evening when we were making dinner at his place and something on the radio reminded me, and the whole story came out quietly piece by piece, while I was chopping vegetables. He listened without interrupting. He did not say, "I can't believe he did that to you," in the way that is sometimes really about the person saying it. He said, "That sounds like it cost you a lot." And then he asked what I needed, right then, and I said I needed to finish making dinner, so we did. Meanwhile, I had not been thinking about my ex-husband. I want to be honest about this too. For the first year, I thought about him sometimes, usually with a residue of anger I was still working through. But somewhere in the second year, that faded. He became someone who had happened to me, and I had survived it, and my life had become mine in a way it hadn't been for a long time. I heard things here and there through people we had known in common. I did not seek the information out, but it found its way to me anyway, the way information does in a mid-sized city where people's lives overlap without quite touching. I heard that the relationship he had left me for, because there had been someone I had eventually found out, another associate at his firm, which was not a surprise exactly but was still its own small wound, had ended badly. I heard he had moved apartments twice. I heard the firm he had joined had gone through some restructuring and his position had changed in ways that were not promotional. I did not feel triumphant when I heard these things. I want to be honest about that. I felt a kind of distance, the way you feel when you hear news about someone you used to know well but no longer do. It was sad in a neutral way, the way sad can be when it doesn't belong to you anymore. What I did not know until my lawyer called me on a Wednesday afternoon in the spring of my second year in the apartment was that he had been accessing my financial records. Marguerite's voice was very calm when she explained it to me. He had used contacts at the firm and his own access as a practicing attorney to pull information about my accounts. He had not done anything with the information yet, as far as anyone could tell. But it was a clear violation, she said, of multiple privacy statutes, and depending on how his firm handled it, it could be a serious problem for his license. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot again, as I had done so many times during the divorce, and I tried to understand what he thought he was doing, what he was looking for, whether it was anger or obsession or something else, some version of wanting to know that I hadn't managed fine, that the quiet I had found wasn't real. I told Marguerite to file whatever needed to be filed. I did not contact him. I did not reach out through any channel. I let the process be the process, and the process was very thorough, and the consequences came without me needing to do anything at all. His firm let him go. I learned this several months later, not from anyone close to either of us, but from a public filing that Marguerite's office flagged. There was a disciplinary review. His name appeared in documents that are, by their nature, public record. I do not know what his life looked like in the aftermath of all that, and I do not spend time imagining it. I was offered a charge nurse position at the hospital that fall. I took it. The pay was better, and the work was harder, and it was exactly the right amount of harder. The kind that made me better at what I do rather than just depleting me. Marcus and I moved in together the following spring, into a house we chose together, with a yard that had a garden his daughter immediately claimed for tomatoes. I liked her immediately, this kid. She was 12 and opinionated and deeply serious about the tomatoes, and she asked me questions about nursing with the focused intensity of someone who was actually listening to the answers. She called me by my first name, which is Audrey, and it felt right. I have not reconstructed my life around what was done to me. I want to say that clearly because I think it would be dishonest to frame it that way. What happened with my ex-husband was real, and it was painful, and it changed certain things in me. But it did not become the story I tell myself about who I am. It became one of the things that happened. What I know now that I did not know then is this. I had been so focused on holding things together for someone else that I had stopped noticing what I was actually capable of on my own. 3 years of double shifts. 3 years of receipts and logistics and quiet management of a life that I thought we were building together. All of that was mine. The discipline, the competence, the ability to keep going when it was hard. All of that was in me the entire time. He didn't take anything from me. He just left. And it turned out that when he left, everything I needed was still there. The ceramic bowl I made in my 3rd class at Felicity's studio is still on my kitchen counter. It's lopsided in a way that initially bothered me, and that I've come to find appropriate. It holds my keys. Every morning when I leave for work, I pick them up out of that bowl and I go do my job, and the life I have is mine in a way that is ordinary and complete and real. I don't need him to know any of this. That's the thing I could never have understood in the kitchen with the cold soup and the sticky note that I understand now. The quietest version of winning is the one where you stop needing the other person to witness it. He lost everything because of what he chose to do. I lost nothing. I couldn't rebuild. I was already the foundation. I just didn't know it yet. I used to think that what happened to me was a story about betrayal. Now I think it was a story about clarity, the kind that only comes after something breaks. For 3 years, I paid for his ambition with my body, double shifts, overnight rotations, holidays spent on the floor of an ICU while he was home studying. I didn't resent it at the time because I believed we were building something together. That belief was the most expensive thing I ever bought, and I bought it willingly. That's the part I had to sit with for a long time before I could be honest about it. I wasn't blind. I chose to keep believing because the alternative, that I was holding up a structure that only benefited one of us, was too heavy to look at directly. What I know now is that the truth doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just arrives. Sometimes it comes by courier with a sticky note attached. When the papers came, I had 2 choices. I could come apart, or I could get very, very organized. I chose organized, not because I was strong in some heroic way, but because falling apart felt like giving him something else that was mine. The receipts I had kept, the pay stubs, the documented years of financial contribution, none of that was strategy. It was just how I lived. But it turned out that living carefully, living with integrity and attention, had built something solid underneath me that I didn't even know was there. That's the thing about integrity. It doesn't always feel like protection while you're practicing it. It just feels like the right way to be, and then one day, when something tries to take everything from you, you find out it was armor the whole time. He made choices too. He chose to use his position, his access, his professional credentials to reach into my financial life without my consent. I don't know what he thought he would find. Maybe he needed to know I was struggling. Maybe he needed me to still be the woman sitting alone with cold soup, so that the version of himself he had constructed could stay intact. Whatever the reason, the choice was his, and the consequences followed from it with the kind of logic that has nothing to do with luck or fate. Just cause and effect, clean and impersonal. Marguerite filed what needed to be filed. The process did what processes do. I didn't orchestrate anything. I didn't plan for any particular outcome. I just refused to be small about it, refused to look away, refused to let it pass because confronting it was inconvenient. That refusal, that small, quiet act of not letting something wrong go unnamed, was the most powerful thing I did through all of it. Felicity once said something to me on a Saturday morning, over bad coffee after ceramics class, that I've thought about many times since. She said that most people confuse endurance with passivity. They think that staying quiet and continuing to build is the same as accepting mistreatment. It isn't. There is a version of quiet that is defeat, and there is a version of quiet that is someone working. Learning the difference between those 2 things is, I think, one of the harder pieces of growing up. I was working the whole time, on myself, on my career, on the slow, unglamorous project of becoming someone whose life was actually hers. Marcus didn't save me. Marguerite didn't save me. The charge nurse position didn't save me. I had already done the saving before any of those things arrived. What they did was show up in a life that had room for them because I had done the work of making space. The lopsided bowl on my counter, the one I made in my third ceramics class, holds my keys. It is imperfect, and it is mine, and I made it with my own hands. That's the only metaphor I need.